Let's dive right into this fascinating journey tracing exactly how humanity has conceptualized war and peace throughout history. Today's explainer is distilled directly from the really profound translator's introduction to Immanuel Kant's famous essay, Perpetual Peace. We're going to look closely at the historical progression of how we as a species have thought about, justified, and ultimately tried to legally constrain warfare.
Because we're covering vast sweeps of time, here's our roadmap. We'll hit the paradox of peace, the state of nature, war in classical antiquity, religion and holy war, the Middle Ages, and finally, the birth of international law.
Starting off with Section 1, the paradox of peace.
It's a really fascinating contradiction. The translator identifies our modern era as an age of unions and peace societies. People are working together with a newfound solidarity. Yet, simultaneously, international rivalries and prejudices are absolutely multiplying. The conflicting interests aren't shrinking. They're actually growing with every passing year. It's a massive, perplexing paradox that really defines the modern world.
And this inherent contradiction begs a massive question. Where did the idea of perpetual peace even come from in the first place? And what is humanity's original, natural condition? Because think about it. If we're naturally peaceful, why is peace so incredibly hard to maintain? And if we're naturally warlike, how did we ever conceive of peace at all?
That brings us to Section 2, the state of nature.
We have a stark contrast between two legendary thinkers on this issue. On one hand, you have Rousseau, who imagined this golden age of peaceful, isolated men needing absolutely no one, living entirely without industry, speech, or war. But then you have Hobbes, who argued our natural state was the exact opposite, a brutal, continuous, incessant war of all against all, starting between individuals, then escalating to families, and finally tribes. And honestly, as the source text notes, history and science makes Hobbes' grim view infinitely more probable.
Relying on John Locke, the text explains that this primitive state of fearful insecurity basically forced humans to act. Constant dread meant we had to choose leaders and form civil states just to survive. But here is the fascinating twist. Forming a government didn't end war, it merely upgraded it. It transformed irregular, chaotic plunder into the systematic, deliberate war of community against community and nation against nation.
Moving right along to Section 3, War in Classical Antiquity.
It's wild to consider that highly cultured Greeks viewed all outsiders as barbarians by natural law. Aristotle literally justified war as a practical, natural tool. He argued that military training wasn't just for defense, it was to seek imperial power and exercise despotic rule over those deemed naturally deserving of being slaves. For the Greeks, the ancient world was a place of perpetual war, where defeat simply meant annihilation or slavery.
Rome took this concept even further with their jus belli, or law of war. Rome's approach wasn't about leniency or justice in any modern sense. It was driven by a sacred command to expand. When the Romans refrained from pressing their rights against a conquered foe, it was really just a prudent policy aiming at a world-embracing empire. They essentially sought to blot out natural boundaries entirely and reduce all rights to mere imperial citizenship.
Section 4, religion and holy war.
This shift to monotheism built a completely new framework for conflict. Polytheistic nations could easily tolerate neighboring gods. Their wars were basically for material interest or power. But the shift to monotheism introduced a profound intolerance. Because there was only one true, invisible God, the very existence of other gods was seen as a continual insult. This shifted the entire motive of war from mere conquest to sacred extermination or violent conversion.
Diving deep into the texts of the Old Testament and early Islamic writings, the source notes how vengeance and absolute devotion were bound up in the very idea of the Creator. Whether it was the Israelites clearing Canaan or early Muslims propagating faith by the sword, religious compromise became literally impossible. The war was commanded by the religion itself.
On to Section 5, the Middle Ages.
We're tracking an incredible ideological pipeline here, a total reversal in attitude. It starts with early Christians and martyrs who strictly refused military service, strongly believing love your enemies meant absolutely no soldiering. But then Constantine makes it a state religion, and the fighting spirit takes over. This culminates in the Bloody Crusades, and astonishingly, the phenomenon of fighting clergy, where bishops and priests actually buckled on armor and fought in battle.
The church completely transformed into a fiercely military institution. It struggled with emperors, pronounced bans on disobedient states, and brutally punished disloyalty.
The translator makes the really striking historical observation that the Catholic Church in the Dark Ages became far more warlike and aggressive than the ancient states of Greece or Rome ever were.
The irony here is remarkably thick. Despite Christianity's early visions of human brotherhood, the fall of the unified Roman Empire actually removed a massive structural guarantee of peace. Without Rome's central authority to enforce order, Europe plunged into the Middle Ages, a terrifying state of near-perpetual private, feudal, and religious warfare.
And finally, Section 6, the birth of international law.
Looking at the grand pattern of history, we moved from the prehistoric state of nature to classical world-embracing empires, right into the feudal and religious wars of the Middle Ages. But the breakdown of that old world and the massive chaos of those medieval centuries was actually the necessary catalyst for the final era, the Reformation, which gave rise to the modern state.
This created a massive mechanical shift. The Reformation didn't just change religion, it completely shattered the political unities of Europe. By displacing the Pope as the supreme arbiter, it created free, independent nations. With no overarching empire or religious authority left to settle disputes, these new states desperately needed a new science, a new set of rules, simply to keep from destroying each other entirely. And that is exactly what gave us international law.
Knowing that our modern laws weren't born from pure idealism but from the ashes of religious and imperial bloodshed, we are left with a really provocative thought to end this explainer. Is the perpetual peace Kant dreamed of a physical destination we can actually arrive at? Or, given our turbulent, warring history, is peace simply a daily, active choice we must continuously make to suppress our oldest, most violent instincts? Thank you so much for exploring this remarkable history with me. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.